Today we have a very special treat joining us on the program. Art Thompson, a mentor and teacher from the John Birch Society on 2A for Today. Two A for Today is a program where we explore all things Second Amendment, all things that protect, threaten, and violate the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. Welcome to the show, Brother Art Thompson.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm going to read a brief intro, a bio on you. I'm going to read it here, so I'm not going to be looking at the camera. Art Thompson is a mentor and teacher of mine, and he's been on the front lines informing and educating the heirs of American liberty for close to 60 years with the John Birch Society. Art served as CEO of the Society for 15 years. Prior to that, Art held virtually every volunteer and staff position in the Society, including National Director of Development and Communications and National Director of Field Activities. He attended the University of Washington, the Washington Military Academy, and other business-related institutions, and served as an officer in the Select Reserve Force of the Army and National Guard. Art's the author of To the Victor Go the Myths and Monuments, International Merger by Foreign Entanglements, and In the Shadows of the Deep State. Oh, and one more. China, the Deep State's Trojan Horse in America. Actually, I'm not telling you the truth. That's not all. He also has recently released a 3-book series that I'll let him tell us all about. He continues to regularly contribute to JBS through his writing, video appearances, fundraising, and traveling as a national speaker. Art resides in Appleton, Wisconsin with his wife, Joanne. What a pleasure to have you on the show today, sir.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about your 3-book series? You got a new series out right now.
Well, I've got one on Agenda 2030, which is the United Nations program to control all human activity in the name of the environment. I've got one on the Second Amendment. And when people read it, they say, well, you're not talking about the Second Amendment in this book. And I says, now you got it. What it is it's how the Second Amendment revolves around the Bill of Rights, basically. And then finally, one on property rights, which is very important. Soon I'll be coming out with one on Biden, but that's a little premature. It's going to press soon, but it's not available yet.
Outstanding. Well, we really thank you for giving us the benefit of the wealth of wisdom and things you've gleaned and discerned over the years, bro. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'd like to start the program today talking about a recent kind of news item. Governor Kevin Stitt, of Oklahoma. What a way to lead on the mandates, huh?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We'll see how it happens, though, how it turns out.
Yeah. So for all the viewers, go ahead. Because
I was going to say, I don't know that he has the final word. The federal government's going to be involved somehow or another, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah. Obviously, if you take the money, then you got to be the honey.
Yeah. I'd not heard that one before, but it fits.
Yeah. For all the viewers, if you don't know what we were talking about, the governor of Oklahoma asked the federal government to suspend a COVID-19 vaccine requirement for members of the Oklahoma National Guard who aren't vaccinated and have no intention of taking the jab. He said that the mandate violates the personal freedoms of many Oklahomans, and as it asks them to potentially sacrifice their personal beliefs in order to not lose their jobs. The spokesman, Lieutenant Jeff Lagler, he clarified the policy, and he said, the clarified policy on COVID vaccinations for Oklahoma Army and National Guardsmen reflects the governor's ability to assert his command authority over the men and women of the Oklahoma National Guard while they are within the state's borders. And he goes on to say, the clarification will allow our unvaccinated guardsmen to continue to serve in Oklahoma without any negative repercussions. But it does not provide any protection should they need to attend any military school or training activity run by an active duty component or the Department of Defense. I'd like to get your take on that. Is he right?
Yes, he is.
Simple.
Simple enough.
I love it, man. I love it when people stand in the truth. You don't have to do a lot of arguing when you're standing in the truth.
That's right.
Our Constitution
And
is pretty clear.
You don't have to remember what you said either if you told the truth.
Yeah, which is there are personal benefits to that too.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I would like to use that as a segue to what I really wanted to kind of talk with you about and get your wisdom on, and that is the militia, what it is, what it isn't. And I'd like to start by breaking down the militia clauses in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the United States Constitution. And I'd like to start out by reading it. So it says, the Congress shall have power. That's to the very beginning. And then there's a bunch of twos after that. And it says, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. The next part is to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. And I'd like to start out asking you, what does it mean that Congress shall have power to do something?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, actually. In fact, the Constitution is always straightforward if you really think about the words that they use. They have the power to do this. In other words, it's within their prerogative to do these things. That's basically what it's saying. And there are a lot of things within those powers that people don't think about. For instance, the appointment of officers and that sort of thing. Doesn't say that in there, but that's assumed to be part of that power.
Okay. Well, since they have the power to do it, what does it mean to provide for? They have the power to provide for. What does that mean?
Well, it means that they can provide weaponry for the various militias and that sort of thing. The Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms. That's plural. Doesn't say the right to keep and bear muskets. It says arms. And a lot of people think that the Redcoats were marching out to Lexington and Concord to take away the muskets. Primarily, they were marching out to take away their cannon, because the cannon is really an instrument of war. A musket is an instrument of protection. And so, from the elements, so to speak. And so that is the thing that a lot of people don't really understand, is that up until just about the World War II, at least into the Depression area, during Prohibition, an American citizen could go own any kind of weapon he wanted to. Didn't matter what it was. It could be a Gatling gun, it could be a cannon, and all sorts of things. There weren't that many instruments of war that have been, that we now think of as instruments of war today, like airplanes and all, we can't afford as an individual. But at any rate, it was the beginning of the federalization of law enforcement that started the prohibition of arms amongst the people. The first one was an automatic weapon. Remember the old Tommy gun? That was the first one, automatic weapon, that they were forbidden to own an automatic weapon. Well, that in and of itself was really unconstitutional. But because of the fear that was promoted amongst the population against the gangsters that you read about every day in your newspapers, the Ma and Pa Kettles and so on and so forth, out there, robbing banks and creating mayhem in the streets of Chicago and New York, they acquiesced to the idea that certain arms should be limited. And so that started the whole thing that we start to see today of disarming the American people in the name of crime. It's the same thing.
They should have just passed a constitutional amendment, right?
Well, yeah. If they're going to curtail the freedom of the American people, it should be an amendment. that everybody agrees with, and which that amendment has to be voted on by the vast majority of the states, not just the Congress. So, it's something that we're doing today more and more, is just ignoring this whole process of amending, or even particularly in treaties and everything else. It's terrible.
Yeah. It seems to me that that's kind of the end. That's what they do. Is the end around. If you.
Yeah, it's all done through fear too. Every time they do these things, they get the people afraid of something, and then in that name of that something, they increase the power of and control of the federal government.
Safety and security.
Yeah.
I think we were warned about that from one of our founders.
I believe so.
The next question is, what does militia even mean? What does that mean?
Well, militia is basically, as we said, every able-bodied man in the community, and they form up and within a certain age, and they go out and actually work together to become more proficient in military exercise. They learn how to march, they learn how to work in formation, they learn how to attack and defend and so on and so forth, but they do it as local community units. That's what it's for. Now, a militia in a city today, because our cities are so much bigger than what they were when the Constitution was written, would be very formidable in their size. But that could always be broken down into neighborhoods and that sort of thing. But that way, every man in the community would be armed. What do you think crime would be like under a condition like that? Almost zero, because every robber would know that guy behind the door is armed, and he better not fuss around with the neighborhood and try and burn down businesses and homes and that sort of thing. So at any rate, the government that fears the people to be armed is a government to be feared, basically the way it is.
That's succinct. It's interesting too that you nailed something that I've been pondering, meditating on. Our founders they were praying. They were maybe not all Christians, but 80 to 90% of them were, and they were in a room in the heat with the windows closed, praying for days, weeks, months, trying to get a form of government together that will be able to govern a free people.
Yes.
Because they wanted to be free. They didn't want to be bound. It wasn't about even being the governing as much as it was about giving certain power so that they could protect themselves from outside marauders and people who are evil and wicked, not so they could live free. Like if there was no government and you were a religious and moral society, what would you do? You would. Yeah. And so anyway, the idea that they had this revelation that in order to be secure, the only way a free people could be secure, it says it was necessary. The only time necessary is used with a duty in the Constitution is the militia, and not the president, not Congress, but the militia.
One of the things too that is part of this that a lot of people don't think through is it is also the responsibility of that citizen to partake in this protection, not only of himself and his family and his home, but of his community and his state and his country. He has to assume that responsibility. He's not drafted to do it. He knows he has to do it because he's a free man with that responsibility to perform.
Maintain freedom. Yeah. Good. Okay, I don't want us to drag on really long. We might have to go an extra 5 minutes. Or coming up on the 15-minute mark. I didn't want us to, I didn't want to take up all your time today. But this is so good, man. What does it mean to call forth in that militia?
In other words, to activate them. In other words, to come under the authority of the Congress to do as it says, to put down insurrection or invasion and that sort of thing. Just in other words, calling forth means calling them to duty, basically is what it means.
Okay. Does being called forth expire? I'm in the National Guard, and then I'm not in the National Guard.
Well, the National Guard's a little bit different situation, but relative to being called forth, it's assumed that it will only be called forth for those specific emergencies as iterated within the Constitution. And when those emergencies are over, they go back home.
So is that happening now?
No. It is to a degree, but now that we're involved in so many foreign things, a lot of our National Guard units are being called up to serve over in Iraq, Afghanistan, and places like that. And so it's a little bit of a problem, and they get repeatedly, in some cases, called to do this. They get home, and after a couple of months, they're called out again. So it's a whole different setup today than it used to be. It's the way it is.
Now, what part of the militia clause does sending them overseas to Fallujah, what does that fit into?
Well, it really doesn't. You see, the whole apparatus of the militia system broke down after the Civil War. And the reason they brought on in the whole concept of the National Guard, now you won't read this in your history books, but this was the reason for it. They brought it in and made the National Guard more of a federal militia, so to speak, than the militia that existed before the Civil War. And the reason they did this was because what happened in the South and in the North, but more in the South initially, is that the army that formed in the South was made up of the state militias. Now, in the North, they were made up of state militias too, but part of the thing that a lot of people don't know was that a lot of the Union Army in the North was made up, of private armies that had been set up in organizations like the Turnverein, the Turner organizations of Germans. They had their own militia, not just a community militia, but their own German militia, so to speak, in the North. And so they went right into work for the Union Army. And in fact, the first few months of the Civil War, most of the Union Army couldn't speak English. They spoke German. Now that gradually, subsided, and most of them spoke English as the war went on, of course, within weeks and months. But the first few months, that was the way it was. So here you had all these states that seceded with their own militias that formed their own armies, right? Like in Virginia, you didn't have the Confederate Army stopping the Union, the Army of the Potomac, for instance, in Virginia. You had the Virginia militia. That's who stopped them. And so they didn't want that to happen again. They did not want to have a state have its own army. So the whole militia system was broken down, so to speak, but actually brought more under control of the federal government, so that we would never ever have a situation where any state or groups of states could call forth a militia in their state under state control to defy the federal government. That's basically why it was formed the way it is today. Then, of course, you get into a real problem today, is that it's very difficult to do all the R&D, research and development, and the financing and everything of the weaponry that's required in the modern world today, state by state. Now, maybe New York could do it, but I don't think Idaho could, for instance, so on and so forth. But then that's why a lot of National Guard units are actually between certain states, not just within state. Like in the Northwest, you've got the one National Guard division between Washington and Oregon. You see, they both belong to the same division, and so on and so forth. So it's a whole different thing. It's really skewed from what it was originally intended to be.
And especially probably because we're using our militia in ways that shouldn't be used. It would seem to me if we were strictly defensive, then maybe we don't need some of the, I'm not trying to say we, don't, but maybe we don't need some of the extraneous arms that they have to learn how to use and have. If you're just right here in the United States defending your homeland.
Well, perhaps not, but it is very difficult for somebody to invade us. It's very difficult. The processes of building up the ability to do that is almost impossible if we maintain a strong army. For instance, we built up in England to invade Normandy, right? But we had to cross that channel. Well, how are you going to do that here? You've got vast oceans on either side. The only possibility is Mexico or Canada. And you don't think we can't figure out that they're building up forces in Mexico and Canada and do something about it before it becomes a problem? I don't think so, So the whole situation, because of geography, we are still blessed by that geographical gap that they have. Of course, that doesn't stop missiles from coming in on you and that sort of thing, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, that's a quagmire we're not going to wade through today.
Yeah.
But they'd have to wade through quite a quagmire to get here, because there's places you just can't even travel, to get here from Mexico. So it wouldn't be so hard, I don't think, either, if we had, Oklahoma, I think, has Montana has this, like, the smallest population of all the states. And Mr. Robert Brown and I were talking earlier, and he was like telling me that army would be the 16th largest army in the world if we did the militia the way the militia is supposed to be done. So,
oh, sure. Yeah,
that would be a wall of its own on the border.
Yeah, the only problem, we could still have that militia today in Montana with all the guys that own guns. It's unbelievable when you go there to see how well armed Montana citizens are, because every truck's got a gun rack in the back window, in their pickups. And so forth. But the problem is you need a uniformity of ammunition and that sort of thing to be able to supply, and that becomes a problem.
Well, I've really gone over your time and our time today, but I'd like to ask if you have any solutions that you think so we could return to constitutional principles within the states concerning the militia.
Well, it's a broader picture than just the militia. We've got to do that across the whole board of the Constitution, because we have been losing the Bill of Rights. We started out with the Second Amendment, didn't we? And in my book on the Second Amendment, I show that if you lose the Bill of Rights, you will lose the Second Amendment. And because the conditions will be there for you to gladly turn your weapons over to the government and be thankful that they allowed you to turn your weapon in. This has been done in country after country in the past, and we think we're different people. We're not. We're the same people. And so the thing is that we've got to work on the whole Constitution as well in order to roll all this back to where it's supposed to be. It's just that simple. And it's also complex, of course, and it's also a real heavy burden to be able to do that, but we've got to start.
Totally agree with you. I have some ideas too. I'm not going to go into them today, but I really, really so appreciate you coming on the show today, brother. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And so that concludes our program for today. Again, in the coming weeks and months, we'll be talking to experts, trainers, scholars, and all forms of gun right activists and Second Amendment proponents to talk about the different things that are coming down the pipe from that cesspool in D.C. and things that we're doing to shore up our rights in the coming years. Because I believe that we're in for some rocky times. And if we don't get started now, we'll be paying later. So anyway, thank you for joining our program today. Again, my name is Zoe. If you have any questions or comments, just leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get to them, and we'll try to answer them as fast as we can and answer as many as we can in the coming weeks and months. So thank you for joining us on 2A for Today. Thanks for being on the program again, sir.
Yes, my pleasure.